And council, I have started the recording.
So good evening, gentlemen.
Hi there, Deputy Mayor.
And lady, because the mayor is there.
I know, but she's busy right now.
But you said good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, gentlemen, and good evening, Mayor Backus. There you go.
There we go.
Yeah. So, Bob, are you doing that meeting on Thursday?
Which meeting is that?
Hang on a second. The King County budget hearing for Rapid Ride on the I-Line.
Gee, I didn't even know anything about that.
Oh, okay.
Council member or deputy mayor, they decided that we're only going to have one more and elected it, one more public hearing, and I'm doing that tomorrow morning.
Okay, very good. All right. So we can take that off the calendar.
Okay.
Okay. All right, good. All right.
One less meeting, right?
One less meeting. Yep. Okay, get our time here. So do we have Sean with us tonight or Teresa?
Sean.
Okay, thank you.
I'm here tonight, Deputy Mayor. Sean.
Hi, Sean. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
It'll actually be me for the rest of November.
All right. Well, since you're the one, do us a favor tomorrow and turn up the heat in Auburn so it's a little warmer outside.
Done.
All right, cool. It was a little chilly this morning.
Bring the heat.
At my house too.
And some of us were not very smart because we played golf this morning.
Oh, bless you.
Yeah. It was a little toasted, a little chilly out there doing that, but it actually wasn't too bad about halfway through. Surprised to see how many people were actually playing today. It was quite a crowd.
Claude, I saw you between the 6th and 7th hole, and you guys looked like you were plenty warm.
We were not doing too bad. Actually, I took my heavy jacket off because I was having trouble swinging the clubs with the heavy jacket. So, and had my thermals on and my sweatshirt on, and was doing okay.
Nice.
But yeah.
I was heading into the clubhouse to meet with Chris, and I saw Wayne coming out of the restroom and with his mask on. I didn't even recognize him.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It was good today. Yeah, we had some, like always, some good shots and some not so good shots.
It was still a full tee sheet, middle of November.
It was. I mean, we had to wait a couple times because it was backed up a little bit, but yeah, it was moving pretty good. But I was pleased to see how many people actually played today.
Real quick, council, since
Okay.
Deputy Mayor's going to start the meeting here any second, can I get you
Yep.
to turn your cameras on?
All right. Okay, Sean, are we ready?
Yes, I am.
Very good. All right, good evening, everyone. This is our council study session for November 9th, 2020. And I will call this meeting to order. And per the governor's emergency proclamation 20-28, the city of Auburn is prohibited from holding an in-person meeting at this time. City of Auburn resolution number 5533 designates the city of Auburn meeting locations for all council, board, and commission meetings as virtual. All meetings will be held virtually, telephonically, until King County enters into phase 3 of Governor Inslee's Safe Start Washington phased reopening plan. And with that, Sean, will you please call the roll?
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey,
Here.
Councilmember Baggett,
Here.
Councilmember Brown,
Excused.
Councilmember J-Raj,
Here.
Councilmember Malinga,
Here.
Councilmember Stern,
Here.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Here.
All right, very good. Any announcements, reports, and presentations this evening?
No, Chair.
Any agenda modifications?
No, Chair.
All right. All right, we will move into our agenda items for the study session. And the first item on the agenda is ordinance number 6793 with Director Thomas. Go ahead, Jamie, take it away.
Thank you. I'm Jamie Thomas, Finance Director. And I'm actually going to bounce around a little bit. We have quite a few ordinances on the agenda tonight, ordinances A through E. And as we've discussed before, these are all related to the 21-22 biennial budget process. So I'm going to kind of walk you through each of these ordinances. There's nothing new here that you guys haven't already heard as part of the budget presentations, but just wanted to walk through each of the ordinances and how they tie back to the 21-22 biennial budget process.
Okay. So Jamie, just a point of clarification. And so you will actually proceed through the 5 different ordinances, so I don't have to go through and announce each one as we go through.
Correct. And actually, if you
Okay.
don't mind, Deputy Mayor, I would like to bounce around a little bit. These aren't necessarily in order, logical order. So I will be discussing items A through E, and I'll let you know when I'm all done.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes. So bouncing actually to item B, which is ordinance 6794. That is the actual ordinance for the 21-22 biennial budget. So that is the main budget ordinance. That's all of the work that we've really been doing for the last several months. And if you go to page 7 of your council packet, that is the agenda bill for the budget. And the ordinance behind it. In summary, again, this is a budget for the 21-22 general fund and all other funds. We're asking the council to adopt a general fund budget of $82.3 million in 2021 and a general fund budget of $85.6 million in 2022. And then a total budget for all funds, general fund included, is $189.5 million in 2021 and $193 million for 2022. And you'll see the breakdown by all of the funds in the appendices following that ordinance, which is on page 11 and 12 of your council packets. Then that brings us to agenda item C, which is ordinance 6796, and that is the 2-year capital budget. And that begins on page 13, so immediately following the operating budget. And again, these are all of the capital projects that we've discussed back in September. This includes not only our general fund projects, but as well as our proprietary fund projects and equipment replacement through our equipment replacement funds. So for 2021, and again, the detail for by fund for each of those capital projects begins on page 18 of your council packet. And in summary, we are proposing in the 2-year capital budget $26.1 million in 2021 for general governmental capital, which is mostly streets, transportations, and parks. $21.7 million for our proprietary funds. That's our water, sewer, storm systems. Most all of that is the result of the revenue bond issue that we had done earlier this year and doing upgrades to our water infrastructure system. And then $3.7 million in our equipment replacement funds for a total of $51.5 million in 2021. And then in 2022, that's $23 million in our for general governmental capital, $19.8 million in our proprietary funds, our water, sewer, storm, and then $1.8 million in our equipment rental replacement fund for a total of $44.5 million in capital projects for 2022. So then those were the two main pieces to the 21-22 budget. And then like every year, we also have a property tax ordinance that we have to levy. We have to have certified and sent to the county by December 1st each year. And that is agenda item number A and ordinance number 6793. And that is establishing our regular property tax levy for 2021. It's only for the 1 year. And based on the preliminary assessed valuations and the new construction information that we've received from King County so far, our estimated property tax levy for 2021 is $23,346,072. Now, I mentioned this in our last presentation that this year is a little bit different than most years, which is normally we would be able to levy a full 1% and add 1% onto our base property tax levy. But there's actually, the state law only lets us levy either inflation or 1%, whichever is smaller. And the inflation actually is less than 1%, it's 0.6%. So state statute actually allows us, if we pass a second ordinance, to take our full 1% instead of being limited to the 0.6%, which is what inflation currently is. And that is agenda item D, ordinance 6800. And that's just establishing a substantial need, which is saying that all of our costs, so we've looked at our 2021 budget, all of our costs are expected to increase more than 1%, and we really do need the full 1%, which allows us to set that $23.3 million property tax levy that we're setting in ordinance 6793. And then the very last ordinance that we're bringing to you that is related to the 21-22 budget is ordinance 6801. And this is asking the council to amend our code to increase our utility tax rate on our city utilities from a total of 7% to a total of 10%. And as you recall, that was really a main tenet and financing piece to balancing our 2021 and our 2022 biennial budget. So that is agenda items A through E. Are there any questions about any of those ordinances and how they tie back to our budget?
So one quick question for me, Jamie, on ordinance number 6793. When we talk about the preliminary assessed valuation from King County, when do they do the formal assessed valuation? And is there any particular change that we have noticed in the past from the preliminary to their regular one?
No, it's those assessed valuations usually occur at the end of December or the beginning of January is when we finally get those final numbers. What we do is there is an estimated refund levy, and that number also fluctuates a little bit from year to year within a few $1,000s. So we always err on the higher end. And in this case, I'm putting $50,000 in there. So that gives us the capacity. We've set a levy amount of $23,346,000, just in the off chance the assessed valuation changes a little bit. But really what it comes down to is our 1% can only increase 1% from prior year information. So all the assessed valuation does is actually changes the dollar amount that property tax payers pay and how that our $23 million is distributed among property owners. We're not going to necessarily collect any more or any less than we
Right.
actually levy.
Right.
But those final numbers aren't available to us until the very end of December, beginning of January.
And then, as always, as the assessed valuation increases, the levy rate decreases.
Exactly.
Okay, very good.
Councilmember
Okay.
Stearns has raised his hand.
Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just had a quick technical question. Well, what's the RCW for the full 1%?
Let me see. I don't know if we call it out in, I don't have it off
Okay,
the top of my head. I don't know, but I will get you the RCW.
great, thank you.
Are you looking for the 1% limit, the one that says that's limited to 1% or inflation?
I'm looking for the one that tells us how to go above the 0.06.
Okay, so yes, that's the same RCW. I'll get that.
Okay, thanks.
So Jamie, if you could send that to all of us, that would be great. I think it would be a good read for all of us.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Other questions for Jamie, Council?
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, next item on our agenda is item 5F, which is the legislative update with Director Hinman.
Good evening, everybody.
Good
For the
evening.
record, Dana Hinman, Director of Administration for the City of Auburn. And thank you for having me, Deputy Mayor, Council, and Mayor. I have circulated a document to you that I hope you've had time to review. And just by way of information, these priorities are generally set each year in collaboration with a lot of people, internally with the staff and the mayor, and as to our individual areas of expertise. We also work along with some of our neighboring cities as well, and we look to AWC, the Association of Washington Cities, for guidance, as well as National League of Cities. And this is generally led, of course, with our consulting teams of Thompson and Associates and Washington 2 Advocates. So some things carry over from year to year. Those of you who have been on council for several years probably recognize some of the things that we are still working on. We all know that legislation does not oftentimes move quickly. So we tend to carry over a number of things from year to year, or sometimes modify and adjust depending on what the climate is and what may be going on at the time. And kind of speaking of climate, you may have noticed that there was almost two priority lists for us this year, because we happen to be in a pandemic, and which is a first. So each agenda includes a specific call out for COVID relief and how funding is coming down from the state and federal levels, and some of the advocacy work that we have needed to do along the way as those funding sources become available, and how we can leverage those funds. So without too much further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just kind of walk you through some of the things as they have, as we have built them out. Please feel free to ask any questions along the way, and hopefully we can get through this. So I will share this, and hopefully I'm doing this correctly. Okay, are you all seeing the slide?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So our 2021 federal and state priorities, as I mentioned, these are things that we set as a city each year. I've had some conversations with some of you about what this means, why we do this. And these are not the only things that we work on, but these are the things that we kind of consider top of the list for several reasons as we work with our state and federal partners and our delegations in Olympia and in Washington, D.C. And things pop up throughout the year that we tend to focus on, but these are the things that we kind of consider top priority for the city of Auburn as we go through. And so just wanted to start with the state priorities and give you a quick reminder of who our representatives are in Olympia. There's a couple of new faces this year. And on the Senate side, in the 30th Legislative District, we will be represented by Senator Claire Wilson. In the 31st, Senator Phil Fortunato, and in the 47th, Senator Mona Das. And in the House, in the 30th, we have Jesse Johnson and Jamila Taylor. That is a new face this year. In the 31st, we have Drew Stokesbury, and sort of new to Olympia, but not new to us, Eric Robertson. And in the 47th, we'll be welcoming back both Pat Sullivan and Deborah Enteman. And so as we work through our priorities in Olympia, these are generally the people that we are working with, whether it's them directly or their staff members. Just as a reminder, the regular session in Olympia will convene on January 11th. It is a short session because they're not passing a budget, so it's a 105-day session. And we have been informed that the session will be held remotely this year, which is a good thing as it relates to the pandemic, but could be a challenging thing depending on who decides to attend and testify and some of the challenges it could pose by having extremely long meetings and testifiers and things like that. So we will see how that goes, and we will prepare for it as best we can. So when it comes to our state priorities as it relates to COVID, these priorities were put out by the Association of Washington Cities as funding streams were starting to come forward. And these were, as you see in your packet, starting on about page 29, as it relates to cities and how the funding, the COVID funding can come down. And we are really seeking financial support and fiscal flexibility. It's that second one that has been a little bit challenging for some because sometimes the constraints or what you can actually use that money for are very narrow, and it could be a little bit challenging. And some regulatory relief and support for the city-owned utilities where there's some funding being lost. And I think on those last three, we've been able to offer up some programs in that vein, but this is why, first and foremost, when it comes to the COVID funding, that we are requesting at both the state and federal level that we are getting direct funding as opposed to that funding filtering through the state and the county by the time it gets to our cities. As you can imagine, with most things, that money gets highly regulated and difficult to access. And we'll continue to fight for those things. I'll pause here if there's any questions or comments on COVID relief. Not seeing any. Okay. And now just moving into just our overall priorities on some of the things we would like to work on in Olympia this year. And it's these 6 general topics that are listed on your agenda. And I won't go through and read through all of those except to just briefly review some of the high points as it relates to public safety. This is going to be a very robust conversation in Olympia this year, as you can imagine. And so I did include some extra narrative in our public safety priorities as well that also come from the Association of Washington Cities. We have been working with several of our neighboring cities on some of the police reform and other topics related to public safety. And there are, if you'll flip to, I don't know exactly which page, there's a statewide policing reforms section in your packet that are kind of tacked on to what we would like to see worked on in the legislature as it relates to public safety. Some of those things have to do funding of training for our officers and things like that for Auburn's priorities. And we did add some photo enforcement in there as well. We do know that you as a council are examining again the possible use of photo enforcement in Auburn. And there's some things in the law as it's currently written that we would kind of like to see changed so that those programs as they're run in our cities can have a little bit more flexibility. And then moving on to the statewide policing reforms that were adopted by the Association of Washington Cities. We did have a voice in those priorities that were put forward. Like I said, like a lot of things, and being a King County city and a King County city that's not Seattle, several of us, especially South King County staffers, have been working with AWC on what policing reforms and what types of legislation would be most helpful to us as not a large urban center like Seattle, but a smaller suburban city. And so we will be following the legislation as it moves through Olympia this year. We do understand there's going to be a lot of bills around policing and police reform in Olympia. And so you may be hearing from us throughout session on how those things are going.
Councilmember Stearns has raised his hand.
Hi. Yeah, I had a question on the earlier section. It's on the cameras. I appreciate you guys putting that in there.
Mm-hmm.
But when you said allowing cities more flexibility, what does that mean?
I don't know if Ingrid or Chief O'Neill is on the call. They can speak a little bit more to that, but generally the law is very narrow now, that it is only allowed in particular zones within a city or school zones, and you have to pilot locations ahead of time and kind of prove up that this particular maybe area or intersection of your city would benefit from photo enforcement, which kind of, I would assume, slows down the process. And I will allow any of my fellow directors to interrupt me here if there's anything to add.
Sure, just to add on to that. So right now we're limited in where you can do photo enforcement to school zones for speeding. And one of the things that we have, as you heard in the previous presentations, is we have very limited amount of resources in PD for speeding enforcement around the city. And we have several areas where we have concerns and issues where more continuous speed enforcement would be helpful in trying to get some traffic calming in those areas. So it's more about talking to the legislature about what can we do to potentially free up some more flexibility in the law as it is right now, because the city of Auburn cannot do that type of speed enforcement outside of school zones anywhere in the city under the way the law is written today.
Okay, so it's more geographic, like you do speeding downtown or right next to the bus stop.
Yeah, and it would probably be more like looking at areas where you have excessive speeding and continuous speeding, where enforcement by police would be helpful to have in that location on a more regular basis. But with our limited resources, we can't actually do that with the police.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. And then just moving through to our kind of regulatory and land use issues. There's generally, and this is kind of a long list, but it's a lot of this is carryover that many of you have seen before on some of the issues we have in our city around impact fees and affordable housing, rehab housing, and some other regulatory reforms around SEPA and growth management acts and things like that. And I would not even hazard to have any expertise to speak in any detail on this. So hopefully Jeff Tate is on the call and could answer any questions related to that. But like I said, these are generally things where we really need the state's help into passing some reforms and some regulations that kind of slow things down here, quite frankly, or make things more expensive than they should be.
Deputy Mayor DeCourcy's raised his hand.
Okay, thank you. Dana,
Mhm.
On the affordable housing, just to comment on that, in our King County Affordable Housing Committee, we've gone through quite a few different variations of what the need is and what that means. And what's been focused on recently with that is we know the need is deeper than the 60% AMI as shown here. It is more like 50 or 40 as you've stated here. But it's also been stated that the greatest need is the 0 to 30% of AMI, which is a highly unserved population right now. And that is typically the deep subsidy public housing or Section 8 voucher program, which is really not providing the level of need that is required. And the waiting lists are years long to even get into those programs. So there is a statement that the committee has put together related to the greatest need being between 0 and 30. And perhaps we should just make a comment in this statement related to that part of the need.
Okay.
And I believe Jeff has also mentioned that in Auburn, we have a little bit of a struggle trying to work within the need of that population, even for us, because it's so hard to do that without the required funding, and both on the state and federal side to try and do something to at least mitigate some of that situation that we're in.
Okay, thank you.
And then also just on your regulatory reform, absolutely. We have the Growth Management Policy Board, we have talked about the Growth Management Act, and that's been a topic for quite a few years now in relation to some efforts to revisit the GMA and what that means for our affordable housing objectives. So hopefully we're still looking at that process taking shape through the state legislature, and maybe a little more emphasis on that this year in relation to where they might be in that. They've said they're going to take it up, but maybe a little more push from all the cities to make sure that it's on their front burner, not their back burner.
Okay, sounds good.
Councilmember Kraut Manuel's raised her hand.
Dana, on that,
Deputy Mayor DeCourcy. Dana, on the photo enforcement, or Ingrid, have we gotten a study on how many tickets, speeding tickets people received when we had the cameras in the school zone, and how many accidents we had in those areas where we did have the cameras in the intersections? And are we going to be getting that information here soon?
So the short answer to your question is yes, we are pulling together some of that data. It's not quite as easy to pull that information from several years ago and get it narrowed down to what exactly was there during the photo enforcement area versus what was not impacted by the photo enforcement areas. So we're working through that. So it's going to take some time because all of those records are individual records that we have to go through. So, but that's something that we are working on. And when we come back to talk to you some more about that in 2021, we'll have some additional information.
Thank you.
Councilmember J. Raj has raised his hand.
Go ahead, Councilmember J. Raj.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor DeCourcy. Ingrid, we are going to do a new study as well, right, on the traffic.
So the way that for the photo enforcement related to the school zones, so the way that process works is we'll go through an RFP process to select a vendor, and then that vendor will do some specific analysis on specific locations before we pick the actual locations where we would install photo enforcement. So there's quite a bit of detailed work that needs to be done that is part of the process with the vendor. We unfortunately do not have the staff time or resources to do that type of an analysis and really need the expertise of the vendor to go through and do some of that analysis for us.
All right.
Deputy Mayor DeCourcy's raised his hand.
So Ingrid, in relation to the school zones, have we received or had discussion with staff members of the school zones as to previously how that program served their needs or did not serve their needs, and what the impact was and what their recommendations are?
So we've had different conversations over the last several years on the needs for the school zones around the schools. We have not necessarily talked about specific photo enforcement, as we are usually focused more on the safe walking routes with the school district. But the impact that we hear from the community who complain about the amount of speeding that they're seeing in those locations is really more of what we're looking at when we look at where would we put in a photo enforcement in a school zone. Where are we seeing that speeding happening? Where is police seeing speeding happening in order for us to go through and evaluate those locations?
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Trent Manuel's raised her hand.
Ingrid, I wanted to ask another question on the, do we have data on how many accidents since the time we have taken down the cameras up to date on how many accidents have happened in those places?
So we have accident data, but if you recall from some of the different presentations we've done since the March presentation and the one here this last month, the city has also made improvements at several of those intersections, both while we had cameras there and then after the cameras have come down for safety improvements. So it's a little difficult to compare apples to apples, if you will, for what happened during photo enforcement versus what's happening now. So that takes a little bit more work for staff to go through and try to determine what does that actually look like to answer the question that council had asked.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Stearns has raised his hand.
Go ahead, Councilmember Stearns.
Oh, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think this is maybe more for Dana. So it's on the public safety section, and it's the third bullet. It starts with rights of persons who are experiencing homelessness. It's that second part, but proposed legislation would create a private cause of action, and it fails to balance. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, that has to do with there have been certain pieces of legislation that have been proposed over the last 2 or 3 years that kind of removes local control of how a city may address persons experiencing homelessness in their cities, and kind of in a basic term, it's kind of, that a person has a right to be homeless, which would kind of hamstring people to actually be able to, address the need in their cities in a particular way. And so this, we've left that in there simply because just in case there are kind of further efforts to remove local control on dealing with homelessness and how homeless may be dealt with in a particular city. And in the previous legislation that was offered up, our legal team felt that it would, basically cause cities to be sued based on whatever it was that we may be doing as far as maybe removing encampments or encouraging people to move off public lands and things like that.
Okay, so it's not the Protecting Safe Streets and Free Speech Act.
No.
Okay, because that also would open us up to lawsuits.
Exactly, yeah.
But it's not that.
But it's not that, no.
But are we opposed to the Protecting Safe Streets and Free Speech Act that would open us up to lawsuits?
I don't know that we have actively looked at that. I can't really say for sure. I would probably have to defer to our legal team on, where they have, if that is something where they have seen that we have some exposure there.
Okay, because I mean, it sounds like it would be in the same category, just quote unquote proposed legislation.
Right.
That would create a private cause of action.
Sure.
Right. I mean, it's almost like the same exact thing.
Sure. Yeah.
So could we look into that? See what?
You bet.
Thanks.
Councilmember Trump Manuel's raised her hand.
Go ahead, Councilmember Troutman.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor DeCoursey. Dana, on the first bullet, I know that King County is doing this and they have been
Do you want
doing
me to say
this.
something or?
Hello? Hello?
We hear you, Councilmember.
Oh, okay. I was asking Dana a question about the first bullet on the firearms and results of domestic violence in its incidents and background checks. Are we doing that here in our city? Because I know that from being on domestic violence task force, King County has been doing that, and they have done a great job on collecting handguns and everything away from the perpetrators. Is Auburn doing that as well?
I would have to defer to police as to whether or not we are doing it. I'm going to assume that we are, but what this was for is essentially there is no funding for local police departments to do the administration of this, and it is very time consuming. And the cities receive no funding beyond just what we have in our budgets to perform this particular task. So that's why that's in there. This is really more about trying to make sure that local jurisdictions have funding for this because it's on us to do it. We can't defer that to King County. We can't defer it to anybody else. So that's really kind of where that is. So
are we going to be looking for fundings from council, or are we looking for grants, or what is it?
So Chief O'Neill is available, Councilmember Trout Manuel, if you want to ask your question again.
Okay, I was just asking on if we were doing the confiscating the guns and taking them away from the perpetrators here in Auburn, because I know that in King County, being on the regional law and justice, we hear, and also on domestic violence, we hear about what they've been doing. So I was just wondering if we're doing this in Auburn, and that's the question I was asking.
Yeah, we are absolutely confiscating guns when an order comes in that's related to domestic violence. There's usually an option to either bring their firearms down to the police station and surrender them, or an officer will come out with the court order and collect them. 9 times out of 10, we're having a lot of success with folks coming down to the police department, surrendering their weapons when they're ordered to do so with a court order.
Okay, that is really good to hear, because that's really good to hear. I wasn't aware we were doing it, and I'm really happy to hear that Auburn police department is doing that. I know that it is cost effective because I hear it all the time when domestic violence and they talk about it. So I'm just really excited to hear that. Thank you, Chief O'Neill.
Okay, moving along. We're jumping into our Public Works, Transportation, and Infrastructure section. This is what seems like quite a long list. Some of these things are project specific and things we want to ensure that the legislature continues to fund. What I will tell you, what I hear from Ingrid is pretty much everything centers on ensuring that the Public Works Trust Fund is funded. We know that that has been rated year in and year out. There are very few chances for cities and municipalities for direct funding for their very expensive and important infrastructure projects. So pretty much as always, the Public Works Trust Fund is generally our area of focus as we go into the legislature. There are other things that we continue to work on and work towards as it relates to funding infrastructure. As we know, as our cars become more fuel efficient, the gas tax goes down. And there's, a myriad of other things on that list that I will leave to you to review if needed. And if you do have any questions, we all know that Ingrid is our expert. Okay. Moving into parks and open spaces, again, with the state agenda, Daryl and his staff work closely with a lot of other agencies and groups around the region to ensure funding for open spaces and land conservation. And there are some specific asks that are being supported by the Washington Recreation and Parks Association that we have added into our priorities as well to support, and those go directly to the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Programs, youth athletic facilities, and aquatic lands enhancement account. And this Auburn, Daryl and his staff do a pretty darn good job of securing funding from the state for a lot of our projects. So we will continue to effort towards that as well. And the last two things on sales tax mitigation, jail costs, and social services, those are the ongoing streamlined sales tax. As you know, the governor vetoed the streamlined sales tax from the last year's budget. And will possibly, we're going to ask that veto be removed going into 2021. We're working with the cities that are negatively affected by the streamlined sales tax to see if we can get that restored, and as well as to continue fair and equitable funding for the SCORE jail. And our social services, of course, our large focus on our resource center, and we will continue to work towards gaining more funding from state and other sources to prop up those programs for us. So that is the state priorities. I'll wait a second if there's any further questions before we move into our federal priorities. All right.
Councilmember Stearns has raised his hand.
Oh.
Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just have one. We had talked about the RIA 9 state priorities, and I guess we'll be doing those separately, but can we move those along too?
Yes, I think, I believe that Director Tate has been working with you on setting a date for that work. Is Jeff on the call?
For the record, Jeff Tate, Director of Community Development. So
I think the plan that we had agreed to was to move it forward under its own resolution for council to take action on. Typically, with most of the other entities like RIA or SKIP, SKIP has its own legislative agenda. So other agencies that we work in collaboration with will provide a council statement of support to work that those agencies are doing. So we are intending to bring forward a resolution for council consideration.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you again, Jeff. Moving into our federal priorities, just as a reminder, our representatives in Washington, D.C. In the Senate are Maria Cantwell and Patty Murray, and in the House, it is Kim Schreier. And as with the state priorities, we do have a separate carve out as it relates to COVID relief funding as it's coming from the federal government. Essentially, it's the same thing as that we are requesting direct public funding as we recover from COVID, and explicitly supporting the HEROES Act that has been put forward. It does offer great assistance for airports and businesses and schools and emergency workers, but local direct funding we are hoping will be a part of this as well. National League of Cities has a Cities Are Essential campaign that they have been encouraging cities to make use of as well. They put together some great materials for cities to use as we work with our delegations. And I know that Mayor Backus has made quite a number of phone calls and emails to our federal delegation, and can tell you that they are 100% supportive and will continue to fight for those things. And I do recall that we had some of you as well reach out to Senator Fortunato and some others in Olympia as well, kind of in the same vein. So don't be surprised if you get some more requests to do some lobbying on our behalf for those things. So, but that just kind of in a general sense is where we're looking as it relates to COVID relief. And our federal priorities list, this did not really change a lot from the year before, with just a couple of exceptions. But the cybersecurity initiative was something that we added, actually, I think for the first time. And, as we have seen in other cities, other jurisdictions, businesses being hit with ransomware and all sorts of hacking that is going on. There's, that's one of those things where, it's unclear if your insurance will cover certain things. It's unclear as to what is especially a government agency going to do if they are taken down in a cyber attack. So that is something that's becoming more and more prevalent in a lot of federal agendas as it relates to cybersecurity. And then homelessness and housing. There you can see Deputy Mayor DeCoursey that the 0 to 30 is called out. That is something that could and should be a large focus in a federal agenda as it relates to federal funding for those things. And, human services, really about the same thing, the focus on the resource center and addressing behavioral health, mental health, and homelessness in our communities. And just kind of moving through quickly with the Parks and Recreation. The Jacobson Tree Farm, that is something that we added to our agenda last year. We feel like there could be an avenue for federal funding as it relates to that project. And public safety is, again, there's relating to Councilmember Trout's question around, confiscation of guns and those sorts of things. We do see that public safety is, police departments especially are, they're asked to do quite a lot of things, and many of those things are unfunded and require a lot of resourcing. And so as it relates to public safety, that's where a lot of our public safety work is focused at the federal level. Cable and telecommunications has been an emerging and kind of an ongoing issue as it relates to 5G deployment in cities. And we will always fight for local control in our cities, and the FCC has kind of given carte blanche to 5G deployment in cities without any compensation for either use of right-of-way or use of local facilities to deploy their equipment. So this is something that we will keep a close eye on as things move forward. Also with cable and telecommunications, and especially in this pandemic, the disparity between internet access and broadband internet access in our communities has become highly made much more clear, and that our rural areas need access to reliable high-speed internet. And we would look to the federal government to be a large part of that answer. And with federal transportation, again, reauthorization of funding is really the focus. We do have some projects that we feel could qualify for some federal funds that we continue to work on, but an infrastructure package out of DC is immensely needed, and hopefully we will see in this as we move into 2021 actually see some reauthorization of transportation and infrastructure funding from the federal government, and specifically the Highway Trust Fund and other federal transportation programs. They change a lot from year to year, depending on what the administration's focus is and who can best qualify for grant funding from the federal government. So keeping up with that can oftentimes be a challenge, and Ingrid and her staff do an amazing job of that. And lastly, we did add specifically and wanted to keep it on the agenda, the disposal of the GSA property. We know that there's 129 acres in our city that is owned by the federal government that they would like to sell. We are actively engaged with them throughout this process, and we hope to have sometime within the next year to 18 months, hopefully we will have a successful sale and redevelopment on that property. We see it as really a turnkey property for this city, and I have many of our staff members continuing to work on this day in and day out to ensure that that this property ends up being what is highest and best use in that very valuable commercial zone in our city. And with that, I will field any questions.
Councilmember Stearns has raised his hand.
Go ahead, Councilmember Stearns.
Oh, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Two suggestions. Would it make sense to put, let me back up. With all the crazy wildfires going on, would it make sense for us to seek any kind of wildfire protection funding from the Interior Department? And then the second thing was my way back when I used to work for the Energy Department. So obviously for me, investments in clean energy seem really important, and that does seem to be the direction the new administration will be heading to. So funding for renewable energy resource projects, clean energy buildings, zero net buildings, things like that, smart grid buildings. might also be something for us to consider. So,
Okay.
Councilmember Jay Rogers raised his hand.
All right, Councilmember J. Raj.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor DeCoursey. Dana, can we also look into public health with people out of jobs and all that? And ACA has been kind of gutted quite a bit. I was wondering if we could add that to the list.
Okay, on our state priorities? Or
We could do that. I mean, federal as well.
Okay.
Mayor Backus has raised her hand.
Go ahead, Mayor Backus.
Thank you. And if I might just remind everyone, this can't just be, as Dana said at the very beginning, we have to be very specific and limited in what we are having as legislative priorities this year. We have found in numerous years that the more focused we are on very specific areas, the better the chances of our messaging being heard. While there are hundreds of wonderful things that could be on legislative priorities, we do try to remain very focused in a specific number of areas because we only have a few moments with legislators. This year is going to be even more challenging. And it doesn't mean that we won't talk about those issues and we won't have an opportunity to be connected on issues that may not make it to the legislative priorities list. But I just want to remind you that less is more in this case.
Thank you, Mayor. That's absolutely right. And the feedback is great to have from council as well. If there are areas of concern and focus that you want us to pay attention to and work through if something comes up. For example, last year as kind of the head tax talk was going through Olympia and what we thought we were going to focus on with our Olympia delegation took a sharp shift as this legislation was crafted to that we knew would be very, very difficult on the small businesses and cities outside Seattle. And what we sometimes end up doing is having to battle the Seattle-centric initiatives, if you will, and which is why organizations like Sound Cities Association and having great relationships with our neighbors and to the surrounding us from Pacific to Federal Way to Renton to Burien, so that we can ensure that something isn't pushed onto the cities that would be onerous and difficult and damaging to certain sectors of our population. So we will keep this in mind, and like I say, we follow bills, we follow legislation, and if there's things that really require a strong voice, either up or down, you'll be hearing from us. We may ask you to make some phone calls or sit in on a hearing and do some testifying so that we can ensure that the things that are good good for us stay good for us, and the things that are bad for us are at least opposed, if not defeated.
Great.
Councilor Malinga's raised her hand.
Councilor Malinga, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I had lowered it again. Dana, you basically answered my question just now when we're talking. I was just trying to make sure that when we're developing these priorities that we're working with other cities so that we have a stronger voice. But I think you already covered that. Thank you.
You bet.
Councilor Stearns has raised his hand.
Go ahead, Councilor Stearns.
Thank you. I agree. I mean, working with other cities is really important. I can tell you that my experience as an attorney with the committee in the House of Representatives we look at, what cities would put together, and actually it was really helpful to have, it's really helpful to have our interns put together spreadsheets, but you could kind of line up where all the cities were on certain issues. So, in that vein, it actually, from a staff perspective on the Hill, it was helpful to get a lot of information, even if you didn't talk about it. We kind of could gather by, if you spend 20 minutes with us, you probably spend 10 minutes on one issue, 5 on the next, and we could kind of figure out what the priorities were, but it is important to have those issues spelled out. So with that in mind, I totally dropped the ball, and I want to thank Councilmember Jayraj for mentioning, mental health. So an issue that is big in South King County in Washington, and I think here in Auburn, is addiction, and in particular gambling addiction. And so, one thing I'd like to, maybe if not this year, but certainly in the next, there is no federal agency that handles, collects data on gambling addiction. SAMHSA does a lot of stuff for, other kinds of addiction, but there have been requests by the National Council on Problem Gambling and the Washington State Gambling Commission to Congress to actually authorize SAMHSA, Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, to deal with problem gambling. And that's something that I think, our city certainly would benefit from. So I needed to get that out. Thank you.
No, and that's a really good point on gambling addiction, because that's been an emerging conversation that we have had as we are building out our community court with King County. And Kendra, our city attorney, rose the issue with us recently that it's a big gap and it's a big need in our city. And that we would, as we seek to have diversionary court and things like that, that's going to help people make their lives better. That is one service, and we don't know where we get it or how we get it, but that is certainly a growing conversation here in Auburn.
Yeah, right now, Washington Health has like one person who works on gambling addiction. But everything is done through the state has minimal resources. Until just recently, there was no inpatient treatment available in the state of Washington. So it's like private, and a little bit of state resources are available. But getting the federal government into this would really change the entire conversation. So asking Congress to make SAMHSA in charge of gambling addiction would be a real victory.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, Dana, for me, on the federal priority side, Councilmember Troutman and myself serve on the AWC's federal priority committee, and we had our meeting on October 29th. And AWC already has a number of items within their federal legislative priorities for 2021, and they're passing what we did in our meeting on to the board for adoption. And just thinking that there are a number of things in here. I don't have the list in front of me, but like cable and telecom, public safety, I believe something on mental health, and on the federal transportation bill and all that. That's all part of it, but perhaps just kind of a review of AWC's priorities to see once again how they align with ours. So as has been mentioned before with the cities, we're kind of all on the same page. We're telling the same story to our legislators.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Director Hinman tonight, Council? Thank you for the very thorough job, Dana. Greatly appreciated, and appreciate all the information. Thank you. Okay, next we have our community wellness discussion items, and for that portion of the meeting, I will turn the meeting over to Councilmember Troutman.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor DeCoursey. And with that, I will turn it over to Human Services. I hope you all enjoyed this program that is coming up because it's very much needed. And I hope that all of us really listen to what they're are requesting. So okay, Joy, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Jeff, did you want to say anything before we get started?
No, I was ready to hand the baton to you, Joy. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm going to share my screen here in just a moment. I'm Joy Scott. I'm the Community Services Manager. I also just wanted to point out that tonight with us, we have Kyla Wright, who is our city's Human Services Program Coordinator. And we also have a few of our Human Services Committee members here with us this evening. So really happy to have them in the audience with us as we talk about the wonderful work that they've done over the past 6 months or so. So I think with us tonight, we have our Human Services Committee Vice Chair, Sue Miller. We also have Kelly Lindberg and Sean Patton. And I believe that we had Carmen Gores, although she may have dropped off at some point, so she might pop back in. As we get further along in the presentation tonight, I might field some questions over to Kyla or to Jeff or to some of our committee members if appropriate, just so that you can hear perspectives from all of us. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully you're all seeing the presentation. So you might recall I was in front of you virtually back in May to provide an update on our human services funding cycle, where we were at the time. I've included some of the information that might be a little bit duplicative in tonight's presentation. So I'm going to try and not spend too much time on that, but just provide a refresher, since I know that a lot has happened over the last 6 months since I was last in front of you talking about this topic. So just as a reminder, this evening, we are going to be talking about our general fund human services dollars. When I'm in front of council, I tend to be talking about one of two fund sources. One is CDBG and the other is our general fund. So this evening, we'll be talking about the $680,000 that we are hoping to have set aside for competitive funding for direct service nonprofit agencies in 2021 and 2022. So these human service dollars are guided by the human services funding priorities set by council, and we'll revisit those a little bit later in the presentation. And they're approved by City Council every other year during the budget process. So we've actually been in this process for quite some time. It started long before this past May of 2020. It actually goes back to early spring of 2019. So our 2021 to 2022 human services funding cycle started towards the beginning of 2019, when the city put out an RFP for a community needs assessment. And we worked with a consultant called Cloudburst Consulting to help us with data gathering. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but including focus groups, surveys, stakeholder interviews, and also combing through local data sources to be able to pull some of that quantitative data as well. That group, Cloudburst, presented to the City Council in October of 2019 the full findings of their needs assessment. And subsequently, in November of 2019, the Human Services Committee provided recommendations to City Council about a funding level for 2021 to 2022 human services grants, as well as recommendations on adopting the priorities that were included within that needs assessment. So the City Council in December of 2019 adopted Resolution 5479, and that really set us off on the process of identifying those priority areas and getting that information out to our agencies. A lot of outreach and work with agencies took place between December of 2019 and when the application cycle opened in March. And we also provided ongoing technical assistance and support from a staff level to agencies throughout the application process. We typically only have the application open 5 to 6 weeks, but because our application opened at the beginning of March, and COVID started to shut down a lot of community agencies, and really they were needing to pivot in how they were doing the work. We extended that to a full 8-week process to give our agencies more time to be able to manage through applying during the pandemic, and also figure out if they were having any issues with connections to technology, with libraries closing and things like that. You might recall I provided this presentation back in May of 2020 with an update on what we received and what the next steps were. Since that time, our Human Services Committee has reviewed and scored all of the applications that we received, and had their final funding deliberations in September of this year. So tonight we are at this almost last piece of this very long timeline, that orange dot. And I'll be describing to you our planned expenditures for the line item that is part of the City Council's budget that has been proposed at this point. So our Human Services program at the city allocates funding through a competitive process to nonprofits in the community that provide direct services to Auburn residents. Our program currently manages contracts for 52 programs, and that includes not only the application and contract execution, but it includes oversight of all of the agency reports and invoicing, regular monitoring of contracted agencies, and support for agencies to identify and overcome any barriers that they're facing to being able to provide the services that they were setting out to provide. In addition, our Human Services program also supports coordination, collaboration, and capacity building for nonprofit agencies. We work really closely with the agencies that we contract with and with other nonprofits in the community that are serving Auburn residents. We also work regionally with other cities and with partners at regional organizations to better assess both the need in South King County and better advocate for Auburn and South King County in those regional conversations. We participate in what's called Share One App, and that is a common human services application process. So 16 King County cities have recognized that a lot of agencies in our county work in multiple cities, and it doesn't really serve them or us particularly well to require that they apply to each city individually and take up that much time to go through that process. So we've banded together and we have a formal agreement with one application where an agency that serves folks in multiple cities can just submit one application and it can go to all of them at once. So we have common questions and we revisit the application kind of database and the process every 2 years as part of this funding cycle process. All of those 16 King County City Councils are currently working through some version of this same human services funding process. So like I mentioned, in early 2019, Cloudburst Consulting was hired by the city and they completed a community needs assessment for Auburn. This actually started way back in 2017. City Council approved a specific budget line item in the 2019 to 2020 biennial budget to be able to conduct this needs assessment. It was intended to both establish human service priorities as well as meeting our obligations for the strategic planning process of our community development block grant consolidated plan. In the spring of 2019, the consultant sought input from City Council. They came and provided a presentation. They conducted focus groups, individual stakeholder interviews with community members and groups. They also met with our Human Services Committee. And in fall of 2019, that community needs assessment was completed and presented to Council. One of the pieces of that assessment was really about highlighting gaps in services and funding and identifying opportunities for the city to better respond to identified and emerging needs, recognizing that the needs on the ground had really shifted since we last did this kind of work, which was mostly in 2014 when preparing for the 2015 to 2019 consolidated plan. So Auburn, the Auburn community and Auburn community needs really have changed between 2014 and 2019 when this work was conducted. The final recommendations incorporated into that assessment included both priority funding areas, so what the funding should be targeted towards in order to have the greatest impact, and also what proportionate allocation to each priority funding area. So previously, our city had not incorporated any kind of proportionate allocation across priority areas. It was really just based on, all of the applications were scored as one group, and then we would see where they kind of fell in priority areas. This needs assessment said that in order to be more intentional with funding and really make a dent in the needs that we're seeing, really move the needle in the community, that there should be specific amounts or percentages of the funding that are set aside to each priority area to ensure that priority areas that historically hadn't seen as many applications and contracts would potentially receive more funding in the future. And like I mentioned, in November 2019, the Human Services Committee provided a formal recommendation to City Council supporting the recommended priority areas and requesting an increase in the Human Services grants budget. The City Council, in their resolution 5479, which was adopted in December 2019, expressed support for that and also established a 2020 Human Services Work Plan and formally endorsed the priority areas that were identified by the needs assessment. The resolution also called out the historic lack of growth in human services grant funding and supported the Human Services Committee and staff in implementing the priority areas and those proportionate allocations, which was something that was, again, really new for us in this process. The staff and the committee implemented the council's recommendations throughout the application and review process. So these are the priority areas that may look familiar to you. We've brought them to you before, and these were the final priority areas that the council approved within that resolution from December 2019. So housing and associated services incorporate programs that provide ongoing housing or rental assistance and supportive services for individuals and families experiencing homelessness. These kinds of services typically are utilizing the progressive engagement model, which means that the amount of services that each individual or household receives is really tailored to what they need to stabilize and be successful. They might include ongoing case management and wraparound services in a variety of areas to be able to move them towards that stability. Homelessness interventions are programs that engage individuals and families experiencing homelessness in housing problem solving. So programs like diversion, which looks at moving folks who are currently experiencing homelessness into housing by identifying barriers that they're facing that might not just be first and last month's rent. It might be that they have debt owed to a former landlord, or they need some creative problem solving to be able to address that issue beyond just a lease. It also includes shorter term light touch models like rapid exit from shelter, which is a particular model within our community. We also have a priority area on housing related supportive services. So this is basic needs that are not housing, but might be linked to them. So things like eviction prevention or utility assistance, shelter, storage, laundry, showers, and homelessness prevention activities. So it's not paying for ongoing rent, it's not providing transitional housing, but it either provides services within a housing setting or it helps folks retain their housing that they already have. In our basic needs category, this was a little bit of a catch-all because there are so many diverse needs within the community, and we wanted to ensure that we didn't create barriers to being able to have agencies providing those types of services. So this incorporates things like food access, youth programming, domestic violence services, physical and behavioral health, childcare resources, immigration supports, legal assistance, and more. And then the final priority area was job training and education, pretty much self-explanatory, but historically Auburn has seen both youth education programs as well as things like apprenticeship and other job training programs within this category. I think one of the things that's important to note that was called out within the needs assessment, and one of the things that our committee worked through in this process, is that very few programs would fit cleanly within just one of these priority areas. So programs are really responsive to the needs that they're seeing among their clients, and they create and tailor these programs that might fall in a couple of these different categories. What we did, recognizing that, was ask agencies that were applying to our human services application process to self-identify based on either their outcomes or their primary service units that they were incorporating into the application. What was the priority area that best fit the overarching goal of the program they were offering? In order to be considered for this funding,
Joy,
yes.
would you hold up and let's see if there's any questions, because that's a lot of
Sure.
material. So council, do any of you have any questions? Well, I guess not. So you can go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So some of the basic requirements for agencies that want to apply to the City of Auburn for funding through our Human Services program is that, like I said, they have to meet one or more of those funding priorities. They need to be a nonprofit agency. So they either have to have a 501c3 status that is current, or they need to have a 501c3 fiscal sponsor in place by the time the application period closes. So if there's a group that's perhaps a grassroots community group that's working on getting all of the requirements in place to be able to receive their 501c3 status, they might partner with a nonprofit organization to be able to be sponsored by them through the application while they complete that paperwork. They have to have a non-discrimination policy in place, meet minimum insurance requirements, be willing and able to accept reimbursements for funds based on service unit completion. And then if they're funded, staff works very diligently to ensure that all of their reports are closely tracked. We look at their data retention and data collection policies. We ensure that all of the services that they are providing and reporting on are services that went towards Auburn residents. And we also have to ask them to undergo regular monitoring with staff. So it's not, once we get past the contracting process, that's really when the real meat of the program begins, is we work with these agencies very closely to ensure that we're receiving timely and accurate information about the services they're providing, and that they have really appropriate policies in place, particularly for things like client confidentiality, financial management practices, etc. So I covered this a little bit in my presentation during the May study session meeting, but we did quite a bit of outreach for this application cycle. It included having information emailed out to all of our current contracted agencies, all of our prior contracted agencies, and anybody who had requested information or demonstrated interest in this process. We had information on our website, we sent information out via listservs, and we provided presentations and outreach to multiple community groups. We also offered technical assistance and support throughout the application process. We want our agencies to be successful through this process. We're not trying to create a gotcha situation in the application. So we provided in-person and online workshops. We had recordings of a question-by-question walkthrough of how to fill out the application available on our website. We had help guides, FAQ documents. In addition to providing one-on-one technical assistance to any agency that asked for it, we also offered virtual drop-in sessions every week through the entirety of the application cycle. And any questions that we were asked by any agency, we provided those answers on our website as well. So if we answered a question for anybody, we answered it for everybody.
Councilmember Stearns has raised his hand.
Thank you. I have just a quick question on the community groups.
Sure.
You had a chance to talk to. Did you get a chance to talk to the Chief Seattle Club?
I would have to go back and check and see if we provided any direct TA to them. I don't believe that we provided any presentations to Chief Seattle Club at the time. Kyla, do you happen to know?
I don't remember doing an individual presentation or TA directly. There may have been some folks on a broader listserv who received the information, so I couldn't say definitively, but I don't remember. I didn't do an individual meeting. No.
Okay. Can we maybe include them in the future?
Sure.
Yeah,
and what we can do is that one of those workshops that I mentioned that we had at the beginning of the application process, we had over 140 agencies at that workshop. And I'd be happy to go back and check and see if they were present at that, as many of our countywide agencies were.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stern.
So this may look familiar to you. This is a graphic that you saw in May as well. This is the initial data on what applications we received. There were 79 applications submitted from 60 agencies requesting just shy of $1.5 million in funding. By priority area, you can see that the most popular priority area for programs that were applying to us was basic needs, with a total of over $604,000 in requests for funding in that category alone. Across the other priority areas, we had similar levels of interest between homelessness interventions, housing and associated services, and housing related supportive services, and just a little bit less received in requests for job training and education. So our Human Services Committee has been very hard at work throughout this process. I'm not sure if you can all see on your screen where Kyla is, but I am going to ask if she could just for a moment hold up our review binder that all of our Human Services Committee members received. As you can see, they had thousands of pages that they had to review through this process. We had those almost 80 applications, and our Human Services Committee members each read and scored each individual application. This is a little bit different than some other cities. Some other cities have their committee break into different groups and they only review maybe 20 of them. But our committee is extremely dedicated and has been very hard at work reviewing each individual application. That scoring and review took place over 5 months. And you can see here the scoring criteria. This is criteria that we made available to agencies prior to the application so that they knew going into it exactly what they would be scored on and what each category would be weighted. And then our committee members were provided with a scoring rubric to better assist them through this process, just going through that scoring process. Applications were scored and discussed by priority area. So rather than just doing an A to Z review, we grouped all of the applications within each priority area that they had identified, and committee members discussed each as a group. So really taking to heart the pieces of the needs assessment that identified the importance of focusing on priority areas and focusing on those allocations of funding for each one. So some of the key considerations that came up in those discussions were prioritizing programs that serve high numbers of Auburn residents relative to the funding request. So really seeing the impact through the number of people reached in these programs, the costs per service unit compared with impact. So our committee and staff certainly recognizes that there are some types of services that just cost more because of the nature of that service. It is more expensive to provide ongoing rent assistance and wraparound case management for 3 months than it is to provide a one-time workshop. So while there was not value attributed based on the depth of service, our committee did a really good job of analyzing, is this a reasonable cost given the level of service that's being proposed? They also explored the likelihood that services would continue to be effective and available if Auburn Human Services funding were not made available. So wanting to ensure that there are a variety of services available to our residents was a really important piece of discussion throughout this process. As I mentioned previously, recommendations were finalized by the committee on September 28th, 2020. You'll see much more detail in the memo that was attached to the council packet this evening. There is detailed information by priority area, both of the planned expenditures for each of the grants, as well as a little bit more detail about what was called out in the needs assessment under each priority area and some of the data points that we were working off of. But I just wanted to share a couple of the high level data comparatives in this presentation. So you'll see in blue here, this is the percentage recommendation. So the percentage of funding for each priority area that were endorsed by council in 2019. We had a really in-depth conversation, ongoing conversation in Human Services Committee meetings to ensure that as we were reviewing these applications, as the committee was reviewing these applications, that they were really keeping at the forefront of their conversations, keeping in mind these targets. You'll note that some of them, which is described fully in that memo, were significantly more challenging than others. So as I mentioned, our basic needs category received over $604,000 in requests. And looking at a target of $138,000, that's a really difficult deliberation to be able to get to that number and ensure that the breadth of basic needs services would continue to be available in Auburn for Auburn residents. So as you can see across a few of the priority areas, there were slight decreases in the percentage, just by about 0.5 percentage point or so. And then that additional cost savings, as it were, was put towards basic needs, really recognizing not only the level of needs in the community, but also the strength of applications that we received. Also, there's in much greater detail in the memo, you can see each individual program and funding amount and the type of program it is. But we just wanted to bring it to a higher level, looking at the range of programs that are incorporated into this funding plan for human services grants in 2021 to 2022. So I won't go through all of them, but you can see that there's really a lot of different types of programs. So there was certainly that focus on ensuring that that the committee was very true to the intent of identifying programs within those priority areas and keeping it at those planned allocation levels, and also making sure that a variety of services would continue to be included in the City of Auburn's human services portfolio for that grant funding. We also have programs, again, in your memo, you'll see each individual program and kind of target population. But we also have this lens that the committee really had strong conversations around, of ensuring that that there was a diversity of culturally appropriate, culturally specific services, services for specific populations. Obviously, you can see there are also a lot of programs that just serve all populations, but there are programs that specifically target folks based on either situation or cultural identity, or provide very specific linguistic access, things like that. So that was also another area of discussion and of consideration throughout this process. Just wanted to revisit again. You know, you've received the full breadth of of explanation at this point of how long this process has been and how close we are to being able to provide that grant funding in 2021 to 2022. This is part of the line item that is included in the budget that has been proposed to City Council that I believe you will be looking to potentially approve at the beginning of December. So we certainly have the opportunity for questions. I will stop screen sharing so you can see us a little bit easier. Again, I may take the questions directly, or I might call on somebody else, depending on
Council, do you have any questions?
Councilmember Stearns has raised his hand.
Councilmember Stern.
Thank you, Council Member Trout Manuel. On the 2021, 2022 planned expenditures slide for target population by program. It was really pretty cool. I really, I think it's pretty amazing what you're doing. I just wanted to say that first. And then I noticed that you have, for instance, African American immigrants, Asian Pacific Islanders, Latinx, but I didn't see Native Americans there. Was that because there's not enough data there, or what happened?
So that's an excellent question. So this is reflective of agencies that have applied to specifically serve a target population. Within this funding cycle, we actually did not receive programs that propose to serve only a Native American population. That might be something that I know we didn't receive any in the last funding cycle either, but the prior ones predate me a little bit. We certainly have a number of programs that incorporate that data into the populations they serve. And one of the pieces of reporting that we ask for is demographic reporting, so that we can show that they're serving everyone within their services if that's their target. But we didn't have any applications proposing to serve specifically Native American folks.
Okay, so it could be just, the outreach, the first sort of way back in the slides part.
It certainly could be, yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Deputy Mayor DeCourcy's raised his hand.
Council Member DeCourcy, Deputy Mayor DeCourcy.
Thank you, Councilmember Trout-Manuel. Joy, this may be a question for both you and perhaps Director Tate. On page 60 of our packet, it mentions the grant funding for availability for 2021-2022 at the $680,000, which is a $190,000 increase from the prior year, and it's a 0.92% of the general fund expenditures for 2019. We had talked about potentially a graduated increase in the amount of funding related to the general fund expenditures for human services, and just wondering what our plan would be for the future, and especially considering now that we're in a little bit of a situation with COVID that in some sense makes some of the budgeting a little bit more challenging.
I'd be happy to jump in on that one, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, we struggled with this because the action plan that Council had approved through a resolution last year provided us with some marching orders on how we should pursue some additional funding and try to get this line item in the budget better aligned with how the growth of our community has occurred. So just for the benefit of other council members, we had had a line item of $490,000, and that line item remained the same figure back all the way back to 2012. So gradually over time, it whether you look at it as a percentage of general fund expenditure, or if you look at it as a per capita expenditure, our human services budget line item was gradually it was staying flat in real dollars, but it was declining in other ways reflective of our community and how we've grown. So that's part of what, when Council in 2019, at the end of 2019, took action to say, look, we got to do better and work to increase that. So COVID has challenged us. It's still part of our work plan to make an adjustment here is what we've proposed for the 2021-2022 budget. But I don't think from a community services or human services perspective, whether it's staff or whether it's the mayor or whether it's the Human Services Committee, that we feel that we've gone as far as we can. We may have just gone as far as we can right now. So we do have the intent to continue to revisit each year that we go through the budget cycle to continue to buoy that number to do more in our community, frankly. So I'm glad that you remember that and that you called that out. I wished that we could be more aggressive in our approach in funding. but we do have a number of unknowns and are still trying to figure out what the true impact is. And I wanted to make sure that we were being cautious and respectful of all the other budgeting issues going on right now too.
If I may, perhaps as a suggestion, Jeff, as we continue to move on this path forward, perhaps we can have some periodic discussion at study sessions related to it if our financial situations change and we can look more optimistically at where we can go in the future. It would be nice to kind of revisit this on a regular basis.
Thank you.
That's great. And if I could just add, I think that one of the challenges that we also have been keeping a close eye on is that as our financial situation as a city has changed, the financial situation of most folks in our community has also changed. And so recognizing that at a community level, seeing that increasing economic instability has contributed to really significantly increasing needs, and wanting to make sure that we balance that perspective as part of the conversation as well.
So Joy, question on that. Have you seen any potential issues related to some of the nonprofits where not only are they struggling, but they may be struggling to a point where they won't survive?
We've certainly heard concerns, in particular from some of our smaller and all volunteer run nonprofits. We've been working with many agencies that we contract with to get them connected to community resources to help them increase their fundraising and grant writing abilities, and also to pursue the new funding that's becoming available, even if short term, through COVID relief at a federal and state level. I will say that also our economic development team has put together a webinar series taking place tomorrow and next week on Tuesday for nonprofit agencies, helping them with fundraising skills during COVID. And that's something that we've been utilizing as a resource as well.
Yeah, it's been really nice to work with Jeff and Joy, and we had the opportunity to meet with them last month, and also with this was the first time that we got together with the Human Services Committee, and just to hear what they're doing and how they're trying to work with everybody and the needs that are out there. It was just, I just have to say thank you for all the hard work you folks are doing, both the committee, Human Services Committee, and also our staff, because I know it's not an easy job and there's a lot of need out there. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Council Member. And really, I can't stress enough that none of this would have been possible without the incredibly hard and dedicated work of our Human Services Committee members. We have at our meeting tonight a number of them, Sean and Kelly and Sue and Janine. I see you're all here this evening. And as a volunteer committee, the number of hours that they put into this work is really incredible. So huge thanks and congratulations to them through this process.
And it is a lot of work and a lot of information for the 3 new council members that have come on board, especially Council Member Robin Malenga, because she's on our committee, and she's learning very quickly on what's going on in this committee. So thank you for helping her out and giving her the information to catch her up as quickly as she can. So you can go on if there's any further questions. If there's none, okay. Jeff?
No, I want to thank Council for the support, and I appreciate the question about the funding piece. And it was really fantastic at the end of last year to hear the dialogue between the Human Services Committee and the City Council, and to provide some additional support as we move forward, and the work of the needs assessment and helping create more structure and intention around the way funds are deployed in our community. So thank you very much, and we will just look forward to adoption of the budget. That'll give us our next series of marching orders to move forward with. Thank you.
Okay. And I guess it goes back to Deputy Mayor DeCoursey. Thank you all for your hard work.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councilmember Trump-Manuel, and I echo that. Thank you, everybody, including all the members of the Human Services Committee for the dedicated long hours and the excellent information that you provide to council. So we greatly appreciate that. Okay, are there any other discussion items this evening? All right, any new business to cover? Hearing none. With that, everybody stay safe, wear your mask, do everything we can to get our COVID numbers down in Auburn, and everybody do everything they can to protect yourself and your neighbors and your family. And with that, we are adjourned. Good evening, everybody. Have a great night.
Night.
Good night.